Well, we want to get Bernie out here, so I'm going to try and be quick. Good evening. I'm Jan Weissmiller from Prairie Lights, and I'd like to welcome you here tonight to the largest event that the bookstore has ever hosted. It is very different in size, although similar in spirit, to the impromptu event we held for Senator Sanders in February of 2015. On that sub-zero winter evening, he had not yet declared himself a contender for the presidency. Nevertheless, we had 150 people from a wide-ranging demographic listening raptly to his straightforward prescription for returning our country to its stated path. We are thrilled by the overwhelming response we've had to this event and grateful to Hampshire for allowing us to hold it here. Bernie Sanders is here tonight to speak. Bernie Sanders is here tonight to speak about his new book, Guide to Political Revolution. In November 2016, Bernie Sanders released the book, Our Revolution, A Future to Believe in. Upon its release, it was #3 on the New York Times bestseller list. At the same time, he formed Our Revolution, a political organization dedicated to educating voters about issues, getting people involved in the political process, and electing progressive candidates. Bernie Sanders' Guide to Political Revolution, his new book, specifically addresses young people eager to be involved in politics. Young people supported Senator Sanders in 2016 in unprecedented numbers, and we owe them our faith and our guidance going forward. Since the election last year, Bernie Sanders has doubled down on his commitments to the possibilities of American democracy. Tonight, he is here to encourage us all. Before Bernie is here, Jeff Cox, a progressive Democrat, is going to say a few words about his policies.
Well, Senator Sanders won't tell you this, but I'll tell you, he is now the most popular political figure in America. Nobody else is coming even close to his popularity. When he first came to Iowa a couple of years ago to talk to small groups of Democrats about whether he should run in the Iowa caucuses, he was drawing about 5% in the national polls. And he wanted to know how he would do in the Iowa caucuses because he had some ideas that he thought were urgent, really urgent to meet the crises that we were facing, and he didn't want a poor showing to discredit those ideas. He was not running to become a celebrity or to become the most popular politician in America. He was running because he cared about America, and he cares about the policies that he thinks urgently need to be put into effect. So he ran without the support of a single Democrat in the state legislature, with a label of socialist, which turned out in the course of the campaign to be a good word rather than a bad word. Who would have thought it? And he had overwhelming and unexpected support from young people. And he tied the Iowa caucuses, which made national news. And he went on to organize his revolution. And he's going to talk about those ideas tonight. And let's welcome Senator Sanders back to Iowa.
Thank you. Thank you. Whoa. Let me thank Jan. Let me thank Jan and Jeff for the introductions. And I do remember the wonderful event we had at Jan's bookstore. And let me say there are a few more people out here tonight than there were then. And Jeff was absolutely right. I want to thank Jeff for his early support. One of the great fears that I had about running is that I feared that if we did badly, the ideas that we were fighting for would be discarded, that people would say, well, nobody supports this and nobody supports that. So let me begin, although this is a discussion about a book, I would be remiss not to thank the people of Iowa and Iowa City for the tremendous support that they gave me during that campaign. During the course of the campaign, I talked about the need for a political revolution, which is precisely what this book is about. And let me be very clear that from an electoral point of view, that political revolution, which is today spreading all across this country, it began right here in the great state of Iowa. So thank you. And what Iowa was about, in essence, was whether or not the people of this state, and in fact the people of the United States, were prepared to accept ideas that many people thought were fringe ideas, were wild and crazy ideas, that were ideas outside of the box. But we had the opportunity here in Iowa to go to dozens and dozens and dozens of town meetings here in Iowa City and in small towns all over the state and explain to people that if we stood together, if we focused on the most important issues facing the country, if we had the guts to stand up to the greed of the billionaire class, that there were enormous things that we could accomplish, and the people of Iowa said yes. And what Iowa was about is that the country woke up and they said, oh my God, it's not San Francisco, this is Iowa. And people were prepared to hear progressive ideas. And then a week later, we went to New Hampshire and we did really well there. And then we went around the country, we ended up winning 22 states, 13 million votes. And as Jeff indicated, we did that by taking on virtually the entire Democratic establishment from the top to the bottom. And what was the result of that campaign? As Jeff also said, an organization grew out of the campaign. It is called Our Revolution. And they are supporting candidates all across this country, from school board and city council and county supervisor and state legislature and mayors and all the way up to the Congress of the United States. And what Our Revolution is saying and what this book is about is that at a time when a handful of billionaires have extraordinary power over the political process as a result of this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision, the only way we can effectively fight back is when millions of people get involved in the political process in a way that we have never seen in the modern history of this country. And the good news is, and the campaign was part of that, not exclusive, but part of it, is that it turns out that progressive ideas are the ideas that a majority of the American people believe in. These are not fringe ideas. These are ideas that the vast majority of the American people believe in. Should we raise the minimum wage to a living wage? Yes, that's what the American people want. Should we have pay equity for women so they're not making 79 cents on the dollar? Yes. And on, and I'll talk about some of those issues. But the point is that what we showed in the campaign and what is happening now all across this country is there is a heck of a lot more appetite for trying to create a government and an economy that works for all of us and not just the 1% that the media and the pundits had ever dreamed possible. Let me detour for just a moment to say a word about what is happening in Houston and to offer my condolences to the families of those who lost their lives and to hope very much that the rescue operations are successful and we do not see more loss of life. But clearly, the property damage is unbelievable and the suffering there is intense. And I can tell you that in Vermont in 2011, we went through not what they're going through in Houston, but something was pretty bad for us. It's called Hurricane Irene, and I was with people who lost their homes, lost their cars, lost everything that they owned. And it is an incredibly, incredibly painful and traumatic experience. In my view, if there is any silver lining in the terrible loss of life and property that is now taking place in Texas, it is the reminder that we are one nation and one people. And what we are seeing in Texas is people coming together, whether they're black or white or Latino, whether they're gay, whether they're straight, whether they were born in America or not. They are coming together to help each other. We are seeing incredible self-sacrifice. And without waxing too eloquently here, that is what this country is supposed to be about. That is what we have seen time and time again. And I believe that all of the American people, virtually all, are going to reach out and do whatever we can to help the people of Texas in the same exact way that we will expect the people of Texas to help Vermont or to help Iowa in our times of need. That is what a nation is about, coming together. Now, I make that point to tell you what you already know, that when people are in trouble, the human impulse is to reach out to help and not to worry. Whether you're gay or you're straight or you're black or you're white, the impulse is to help. But I make this point because at this moment in history, we have a president of the United States who is trying to do exactly the opposite, to divide us up based on the color of our skin, based on our religion, based on where we were born, based on our sexual orientation. Now, I have massive disagreements with Donald Trump on almost everything. But what I detest more than anything is that he is trying to win cheap political points by dividing us up. Anybody here who has read history understands the struggles that we have undertaken for hundreds of years, trying to overcome discrimination and prejudice, and we should be proud, by and large, that we have made progress. Does racism and sexism and homophobia exist in America today? Of course it does. But we should be proud of the progress that we have made, and we have got to be as strong as we can be and doing everything possible to prevent Donald Trump and his friends from undoing our struggles to bring this country together and to fight racism and bigotry. And let me just lay it right out, if I haven't already. And that is right now, and it upsets me immensely. Right now, apparently, maybe as early as tomorrow, Donald Trump is going to end the DACA program. Some of you may not know what that program is. That's the DREAMer program. That's the program by which 800,000 young people who came to this country, whose parents were undocumented, who came to this country at a very young age, who have always lived in America, who only know America as their home, who are going to school, who are working, who are serving in the military, we hear that he may, as early as tomorrow, end that program and take away the legal status of those 800,000 young people. It is shameful, it is disgraceful, and together we have got to do everything that we can to prevent that from happening and to demand that if it does happen, Congress passes legislation to protect those young people. And when we talk about Trump's effort to divide our country up, the African-American community, the Jewish community, was outraged when you have a president commenting on a march by Nazis and white supremacists who then declares, well, there are nice people on both sides. Mr. President, there are no nice Nazis. And our job is to stand with the minority communities, whether they're African American or Latino, whether they are Muslim, and once and for all, end the racism and the bigotry which exist in this country. And today, the gay community was shocked recently by Trump's decision to deny transgender people the right to serve in the military, despite the fact that thousands of transgender people have served bravely in the military. And our job, if we're not going to allow Trump to divide us up, is to stand with the transgender community. And to fight all forms of homophobia. Let me say a word, because that's really why I'm here tonight, about the book. The book is called Guide to Political Revolution, and it is based, as Jeff mentioned to you, on a larger book that I wrote, published by Macmillan, called Our Revolution, a Future to Believe in. Now, the book is primarily geared to young people, but we extend the definition of young to anybody who is young in heart, who is prepared to stand up and fight back. Now, why did I write the book? And the answer can be found in the preface. And in that preface, I speak directly to the younger generation. And I will tell you, having been all over this country to 47 states, I have seen so many beautiful, beautiful young people that if anybody is pessimistic about the future of this country, forget about Trump, just talk to the young people of this country. There's a beautiful generation out there. And what I write in the preface, and here I am quoting Bernie Sanders. So let me quote Bernie Sanders. Speaking to young people, I write, quote, "You are, in many ways, the most progressive generation in the history of our country. You have opposed racism and sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, and oligarchy. You understand the greed and the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality that we experience is not what the United States is supposed to be about. You know that climate change is real and that we have a moral responsibility to take on the fossil fuel industry and transform our energy system away from fossil fuel and into energy efficiency and sustainable energy. What this book is about is converting that idealism and generosity of spirit into political activity. And when you do that, I have no doubt but that you and others like you will create a lot better world than the one my generation left you." End of quote. And in other words, what that speaks to is, in fact, the need for a political revolution in this country. It speaks to the need to transform this country economically, politically, socially, racially, and environmentally. And it speaks to the fact that the young people in this country will, in my view, play a leading and integral role in that revolution. Now, in my view, the hardest part of politics has to do with courage. It has to do with thinking outside of the box. It has to do with thinking big and not small. It has to do with the need to escape the limitations and the constraints of the status quo, with the need to reject as normal what we see every day around us, with the need to maintain a strong sense of outrage, with the need to understand that, in fact, the emperor has no clothes. And to have the courage to ask the questions and provide the analyses that are not often done by mainstream media or by politicians. I have always believed that it is much more important to ask the right questions than to provide the right answers. It is more important to provoke debate on issues that, for a variety of reasons, are often swept under the rug, rather than provide answers to questions that, in the great scheme of things, may not be all that important. And let me just give you a few examples of issues of enormous magnitude that are very rarely discussed. And one of them has to do with what is going on globally around the world. And that is that 6 people, truthfully, 6 people now own as much wealth globally as do the bottom half of the planet, 3.7 billion people. 6 people own as much wealth as 3.7 billion people. And of those 3.7 billion people, many hundreds of millions of them are struggling with hunger and malnutrition. Children are dying by the millions because their families don't have a few cents to buy the medicine they need to cure their diseases. Children and families do not have drinkable water. Kids do not have education. And people are living in substandard housing. The United Nations tells us that for $30 billion, not a great deal of money given the wealth of the world, we could put an end to hunger and malnutrition on this planet. Our job is to stand up in this country and around the world for a new set of priorities which says we're not going to turn our backs on hundreds and hundreds of millions of people around the world who are dying and suffering unnecessarily. And how often have you heard that issue? Anyone see a TV program about it? It doesn't appear. But just because it is not on CNN or CBS does not mean that it is not one of the most important issues that we face as a planet. And then there is another issue out there, because income and wealth inequality is certainly not just a global issue, it is an American issue. And here is the reality again. For, I think, easily understood reasons, you're not going to see this terribly much on television. And that is, we have in America today more income and wealth inequality than at any time since 1928, just before the Great Depression. For the last 40 years, we have seen a massive redistribution of wealth, of trillions of dollars going from the middle class to the top 1/10 of 1%. 38 years ago, the top 1/10 of 1% owned about 7% of the wealth in America. Today, that same 1/10 of 1% now owns 22% of the wealth in America. The top 1/10 of 1% now owns more wealth than the bottom 90% of the American people, and that gap is growing wider and wider. Maybe, just maybe, it's time we stood up and said that that level of income and wealth inequality is not only bad economics, it is moral, it is unacceptable, and it is not what this country is supposed to be about. But again, for a wide variety of reasons, you're not going to hear that discussion. But I think it's time we asked ourselves whether we are satisfied with the 20 wealthiest Americans now owning as much wealth as the bottom half of the American people. Whether we're satisfied with one family, the Walton family, owning more wealth than the bottom 42% of the American people. Whether we're satisfied that at a time when we have 43 million people living in poverty and a middle class which is shrinking, we have seen in the last 17 years a tenfold increase in the number of billionaires in this country. It is high time we raise those issues, and it is high time that we stood up and fought for an economy and a government that work for all of us, not just the billionaire class. Now, I am often asked by the media, Bernie, what do you think? How did it happen that Donald Trump won the election? And let me give you my views on that. Trump won the election because there is an enormous amount of pain throughout the United States of America. Pain that many Democrats refuse to acknowledge, pain which is not seen on television or in the newspapers. And what Trump did was to say to the American people, to the people of Iowa, the people of Vermont, I understand your pain. I know that you once had a decent job and that job is now in Mexico. I know that you cannot afford the high cost of prescription drugs. And I, Donald Trump, I'm going to take on the establishment, I'm going to take on Wall Street, I'm going to take on the pharmaceutical industry. In fact, it was a strong and effective speech. Only problem was he lied and he lied and he lied. But the fact that he lied does not mean that his analysis was incorrect. The truth is that right now, median household income is almost $1,400 less than it was in 1999. The median income of a male worker today is $2,100 less than it was 43 years ago. What Trump picked up on was that people are hurting, people are angry, and people all over this country are working 2 or 3 jobs. They're scared to death about the future of their kids. They can't afford child care. They can't afford health care. And nobody is hearing that pain. It's not on TV. Democrats largely ignored it, and Trump said, I hear it. Now, sadly and tragically, it turned out that virtually everything Trump said was a lie. That the day after he was elected, he became a person, a president, who works overtime for the top 1%. So he told the American people, we're going to have health care for everybody. And then he supports a Republican proposal that would have thrown if we didn't stop it, and thank God we did stop it. that would have thrown as many as 32 million people off of health care. He brought forth a budget and a tax plan that would result in $3 trillion in tax breaks for the top 1%, and yet massive cutbacks in virtually every program that the working class and low-income people and middle-income people desperately need. In my view, where we are right now politically is to recognize that there is a whole lot of pain and hurt in this country. And we need a Democratic Party that has the guts to stand up to the most powerful special interests and make it clear to everybody that the Democratic Party will stand with the working families of this country. As I have said many times, I don't believe that it was Donald Trump so much who won the election as the Democratic Party that lost the election. And that is not just the White House. Please understand, and Iowa is an example of it, please understand that in the last 9 or 10 years, not only have Democrats lost the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate, they've lost some 1,000 legislative seats in state houses all across this country, and about half of the states in America, where the Democratic Party is almost non-existent. And what we need to do is bring fundamental reforms to the Democratic Party. We need to open the doors. We need to invite working people and young people with their energy and idealism into the Democratic Party. And what this book is about is saying that today we have a corrupt political system. And the corrupt political system is about the fact that as a result of this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision, billionaires like the Koch brothers are able to spend hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars every single year buying elections and buying candidates who will be there to represent the interest of the wealthy and the powerful. And what this book is about, and what I'm here tonight for, is to urge each and every one of you to understand the only antidote to big money control over our political process is when millions of people get involved in any and every way. We need to run for school board and city council, for state legislature. We need to rally our communities. We need to knock on doors. We need to educate and organize. We do not need anymore to have working people voting for candidates who want tax breaks for billionaires and want to throw them and their children off of health insurance. We got to turn that around. What we also have got to do is develop a progressive agenda which makes sense and means something to ordinary people. And what is that agenda? What is the agenda? What should we be doing as a nation? Well, if you have a middle class which is shrinking, if you have millions of people living in poverty and sometimes in desperate poverty, the first thing I think we have got to do is demand that if you work 40 hours a week in Iowa, Vermont, or in America, you're not living in poverty. And that means raising the federal minimum wage to a living wage, $15 an hour. During the campaign, I was in Des Moines. and there's a very nice farmer's market down there. I think it was a Saturday morning, and I was just walking around saying hello to people, and I bumped into a guy, and we chatted for a while. And it turns out he worked for a church, and what he did is take some of the produce that was not sold and took it to an emergency food shelf. And I asked him a question. I said, what percentage of the people who go to that food shelf are employed, and what percentage are unemployed or disabled or whatever? And he said the overwhelming majority of the people who go to the emergency food shelf in Des Moines, and it is true in Vermont and it's true all over the country, are working people. But the fact of the matter is, and you can do the arithmetic as well as I can, if you make $10 an hour or $11 an hour, and you got to rent an apartment, you have to put gas in the car, and you have to pay for health insurance and maybe child care for your kid, and you got to keep your home warm in the wintertime. Nobody makes it on 10 or 11 bucks an hour. And here is some good news. And the good news is that if I went before you 5 years ago, I was here 5 years ago, and I said we're going to raise the minimum wage to 15 bucks an hour, some of you would say, well, that's really nice, but you're crazy. Can't be done. But as a result of the incredible activism of people in the Fight for 15 movement, people in the Good Jobs Nation movement, especially people working at the fast food industry, people at McDonald's and people at Burger King and people at Wendy's, these folks stood up and fought back, and they told their communities that they can't make it on 9 or 10 bucks an hour. And the result of that is that all across this country, communities and states are beginning to raise the minimum wage to 15 bucks an hour. We're having real success. And let me also tell you that I introduced legislation a few months ago for $15 an hour federal minimum wage. We now have 31 co-sponsors on that legislation. In America today, our infrastructure, that is our roads and our bridges and our wastewater plants and our water systems and our levees and our dams and our airports, are in massive disrepair. We once had an infrastructure that was the envy of the world. That is no longer the case. I was in Flint, Michigan a year and a half ago, and what I saw there, nobody should see. And that is children being poisoned by lead in the water. And that phenomenon, while worse in Flint, is going on all over this country. People are drinking water that is not. A couple of years ago, I suggested that we spend $1 trillion to rebuild the infrastructure, and people said, you're nuts, that's too much money. But what is happening in this country is people are beginning to stand up and fight back. And right now, it is the position of the Democratic Party and even Donald Trump that we can create up to 15 million good-paying jobs by rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure. The point that I'm making now is that we are making progress despite Donald Trump in bringing forth a progressive agenda. It has to do with minimum wage raising. It has to do with pay equity for women. It has to do with a massive program to put people back to work, rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure. And I'll tell you what else the progressive agenda that we have been fighting for is accomplishing. When I ran for president, what I said is that it makes no sense that right now we consider public education to be limited to the 12th grade. We are living in a highly competitive global economy. 25 years ago, the United States led the world in the percentage of our people who graduated college. We were number one. We are far from number one right now. And our economy will not be strong unless we have a well-educated population able to do the new jobs that are being created, jobs which almost always require more education than used to be the case. So when I began in the campaign talking about making public colleges and universities tuition-free, oh, that was a radical and crazy idea. Well, guess what? That idea is spreading all across the country right now. In fact, New York State has passed legislation that would do that. Other states are moving in that direction for a common sense reason. And that is, it makes no sense when young people need more education to punish them with high levels of student debt because they did the right thing in getting that education. So we have legislation in, and we're going to be talking about it a lot in the next couple of months, that not only makes public colleges and universities tuition-free, substantially lowers the level of student debt that millions of people are carrying right now. A couple of years ago, I had a meeting in Burlington, Vermont with people who had student debt, and a young woman came up who had just graduated medical school, was practicing in primary care, and she said, Bernie, my debt is $300,000. $300,000 for going to medical school. I thought that was absolutely off the charts. I was actually here in Iowa, and a young woman came up to me after my remarks, and she said, $300,000? I just graduated dental school, $400,000 in debt. All right, bottom line here is our job is to encourage not only young people, but all people to get the education they need to do the jobs that are out there. That's what we as a nation have got to do. There's another issue where we are gaining significant momentum. The Affordable Care Act, so-called Obamacare, has, in my view, done a number of good things. We take it for granted, but there are 20 million more people in America who today have insurance than was the case before the passage of the Affordable Care Act. We now look back on something called pre-existing conditions, and we can't believe that that ever existed. Can you imagine an insurance company saying, oh, I will not cover an illness that you had a few years ago because I'm going to have to pay out, it may recur. That's what insurance is, to protect you from what might happen to you. And what insurance companies are saying, oh, you had breast cancer 5 years ago, sorry, we're not going to cover you for that. It is basically insane. And we did away with that. We made sure that young people We made sure that young people, 26 or younger, could stay on their parents' plans. We also ended this business of insurance companies saying there is a limit to how much we're going to pay out if you have a serious or chronic illness. So we did some good things. But having said that, we have to also recognize that our healthcare system today faces very, very serious problems. Today, we still have 28 million people who have zero health insurance at all. And in this room, and in this state, and in this country, there are many, many millions of people who have high deductibles, yes, high co-payments, high premiums, the result of which is even though they do have insurance, they can't go to the doctor when they should. And the result of that, again, something we don't talk about very much, is that every single year, tens of thousands of Americans die because they don't go to the doctor when they should. And I've talked to doctors in Vermont and all over this country who will tell you that people walk into their offices really, really sick, and the doctor said, why didn't you come in here 6 months ago when you first developed your symptom? And the person said, well, my deductible was too high, I couldn't afford it, I didn't have any health insurance. Some of those people die, others end up in the hospital at great cost to the system. The Affordable Care Act has done some good things, but it is time for us to go further. It is time for us to ask a simple question. Is health care a human right, or is it not? I think it is. And if it is a human right, that means that whether you are young or old, rich or poor, working class, middle class, whatever, you have the right to go to the doctor when you need to go to the doctor without worrying about the cost of that visit. You have the right to know that if you end up in a hospital, you're not going to be socked with tens and tens of thousands of dollars in debt, which could lead you to bankruptcy. As a nation, in my view, we have not only got to recognize that health care is a human right, we have also got to ask ourselves another question, and that is, how does it happen in the great United States of America, a nation we are all proud of? How does it happen that we are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people? So again, you're not going to see this. Again, going back to what I said earlier, you're not going to see this on television. But how does it happen that in Canada, and I live 50 miles away from the Canadian border, they have had universal health care for over 3 decades. Go to Germany, go to the UK, go to France, go to Scandinavia, go to every major country on earth, and health care is regarded as a right. The systems are all different, but health care is regarded as a right. So the question that we have got to ask ourselves is, if every other major country on earth can provide health care to all of their people as a right, tell me why the United States of America cannot do the same. But it is not only universal care. It is the fact that our current health care system is enormously complicated, it is dysfunctional, and it is far and away the most expensive healthcare system per capita in the world. Why is it that we are spending about twice as much as Canada per person on healthcare? And that is true for other countries around the world. Why does it happen that we end up spending today almost $10,000 per person on healthcare? And I will tell you the answer. The answer is that our healthcare system today is not designed as a rational system would be to provide quality care to all people in a cost-effective way. That is a rational system, and people will argue the best way to do that. But it should be health care for all, quality care in a cost-effective way. The function of the American healthcare system today is to guarantee enormous profits to the drug companies and the insurance companies. Last year, 2 years ago perhaps, the 5 major drug companies in America, 5, made $50 billion in profit because we are the only country on earth that does not negotiate with the pharmaceutical industry in terms of the prices that they charge. Today, you can walk into your pharmacist and find out that the price of the medicine you have been using for years doubled or tripled. And you ask the pharmacist, why did it happen? And the answer is, they can get as much as the market will bear. And we are seeing that. prices of particular medicines doubling and tripling. We pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs, and people are dying because 1 out of 5 people who get a prescription from a doctor cannot afford to fill that prescription. Can you imagine that? The insanity of a system by which people are sick, they go to a doctor writes out a prescription, person can't afford to fill it because the price of the drugs are so high. Meanwhile, the pharmaceutical industry over the last many years has spent billions of dollars on lobbying and campaign contributions to make sure that they will be able to continue to do anything they want. I was involved in a campaign out in California where the people in California wanted to limit the prices that the drug companies could sell to the state for Medicaid, et cetera, to what the Veterans Administration pays, and the VA pays the lowest prices because they negotiate prices. The pharmaceutical industry spent in one state on one campaign $130 million to defeat that initiative. $130 million to defeat an initiative to control their prices, and 1 out of 5 Americans under 65 cannot afford the medicine that they need. So what we need is to take on the pharmaceutical industry and lower prices. And the best way to do that is to finally make sure that in America we have a Medicare for all single-payer program. Now, Medicare has its problems. It is not a perfect system, and we've got to improve it. But right now, Medicare is doing what it was designed to do when Lyndon Johnson signed that bill back in 1965, and that is to make sure that every person in this country, 65 or older, gets access to good quality health care. And the result of that is that people are living longer, they are happier, and they are more secure. If Medicare can work for people 65 or older, there is no rational reason why it cannot work for every man, woman, and child, and I will be introducing that legislation, Medicare for All, within the next 2 weeks. Now, and again, the good news is that more and more people are moving in that direction. There was recently a good poll, a well-done poll that suggested that 60% now believe that the federal government should take responsibility in providing health care to every man, woman, and child in this country. So those ideas are gaining momentum. But let me tell you the other side of the story. When you take on the pharmaceutical industry, which has unlimited, and I mean unlimited amounts of money, when you take on the insurance industry, when you take on Wall Street, that makes all kinds of money from the healthcare system, you're taking on some of the most powerful special interests in the United States of America. This is going to be a very, very tough fight. And what I'm asking the people of Iowa, as I am the people of every state in this country, we have got to get involved in this struggle. And we have got to confront our elected officials and ask them whether or not they want to continue a system which makes the CEOs of the insurance companies rich, but which is harming so many people throughout our country. Now is the time. We've been talking about it long enough. Now is the time to guarantee health care to all people as a right. And I want you just to think about what that means. Think about being able to go to the doctor when you need to. Think about something else that we don't talk about. There are millions of people in this country who are now staying at jobs which they don't like. Why are they staying in those jobs? They're staying in those jobs because they have good health insurance for themselves and their family. Think what it will mean to this economy when people don't have to stay at a job they don't want, get out and do the kind of work they really want to do. And by the way, I also say to the business community, you are competing against countries all over the world that guarantee health care to all of their workers. I have seen in my own state, and I know all over this country, that small business people spend half of their lives trying to figure out how they're going to provide health insurance for their workers. They change policies every year. They have 3 people working on it. Think about what it will mean for business in this country when business people can focus on their business mission and not have to worry about health care for their employees. President Trump, in the next couple of weeks, I suspect, will be coming before the Congress with some ideas regarding tax reform. I know that I will shock you when I tell you that his definition of tax reform means incredibly large tax breaks for the wealthiest people in this country and for large, profitable corporations. Right now, we have corporations making billions of dollars a year in profit who are paying 0 in federal taxes because they're stashing their profits in the Cayman Islands, Bermuda, and other tax havens. We have millionaires. Warren Buffett tells us that there are billionaires who pay an effective tax rate lower than middle-class workers because all of the loopholes that exist for dividends and capital gains. Now is the time, and we got to stand together on this issue to say to Trump and the Republican leadership, no, we are not giving more tax breaks to billionaires and large multinationals. We're going to demand that they start paying their fair share of taxes. Another issue that is very much on my mind, which I think is an embarrassment for our great country. And that is, today we have more people in jail than any other country on earth. Think about it. China is a communist, authoritarian country that does not tolerate dissent all that well. They are 4 times our size. We have more people in jail, disproportionately African American, Latino, Native American, than any other country on earth, far more than China. We have got to begin focusing on real criminal justice reform. And this is an issue that should bring progressives and conservatives together, because we are now spending $80 billion a year at the local, state, and federal level. $80 billion, locking up 2.2 million Americans. Maybe it might be time to rethink what we are doing, and maybe it might be time for us to be investing in our young people in jobs and education rather than jails and incarceration. Let me conclude by just saying a couple of things. Number one, the media tells us how divided we are as a nation, and in some areas we are. I'm not going to deny that. I am 100% pro-choice, but the American people are divided on the issue of abortion. And in terms of that issue, let me just say this, where I see hypocrisy, and I respect there are sincere people who hold that view, and they have their views from a religious perspective, and I understand that. But I do regard it as a little bit hypocritical when you have a political party whose major mantra is to get the government out of our lives, to do away with all kinds of regulations. Let people live their lives. Why is the government intruding here, there, and everywhere? And yet, when it comes to the right of a woman to control her own body, suddenly the federal government and state governments are there. So I detect a bit of hypocrisy on this concern and demand for limited government, except when it comes to a woman's body. The other point that I would want to make is that on virtually all of the economic issues, the issues that I talked about this evening and many more that I didn't talk about, there is very strong support for the progressive agenda. And our job is to understand that in politics, you're not going to get people to agree with you 100% of the time. That's the truth. My wife disagrees with me more than you would think. All right, and that's true. I mean, we go, people start talking, well, I agree with you on that, I don't agree with you on that. Politics is not having 100% support on every issue. What politics is about and must increasingly be about is progressives going beyond their comfort zone politically. I know it is very easy, and I'm guilty of this myself, to make jokes about Donald Trump. That's pretty easy to do. We've all seen them. But you know what? That is not going to win us the struggles that we need to win. And what that means is that we have got to respect people who have different points of view, and we have got to talk to those people. But most importantly, in this very pivotal moment in American history, when we are fighting for so much, when we're dealing with the issue of climate change, when if we do not transform our energy system, I have serious concerns about the planet that will be leaving to my kids and my grandchildren, et cetera, et cetera. The stakes are enormous. And the message that I want to convey to you, what this book is about, is you can go home and say, oh my God, it's just too much. I can't do it. We can't take on the whole world. I'm just depressed, I'm disgusted, I'm this and I'm that. And I understand all of that sentiment. I feel that every other day myself. All right? But what we have to understand is what we are fighting for is much more than our own lives. We are fighting for our children and our grandchildren. We are fighting for the future of this planet. And I do not believe that we have the moral responsibility of simply throwing up our hands in despair. The truth of the matter is, and I speak to you as someone who's been all over this country, that the vast majority of the American people are good and decent people. They want their kids to grow up, to have good jobs, to have a good education, to be drinking clean water, to have a good environment. Of course, we have our disagreements. But our job is to get involved in the political process, to take on a billionaire class which is buying elections. Our job is to run for school board, is to run for city council, is to support candidates. Our job is to get involved in the important issues facing this country. And one of the things the establishment and the system does to us, consciously or unconsciously, what it says, hey, you going to run for school board. What do you know about education? You're going to run for city council. What do you know about local government? You want to run for Congress? Oh, my God. What do you know? Well, let me respond to that criticism of people not knowing enough. I work in the United States Senate. And if you think you don't know much about what's going on, check out what goes on in Washington. So that is my point, and it is not a complicated point. The future of the economy is at stake. Do we become an oligarchy and a nation controlled by a handful of billionaires? The future, that's right. The future of democracy is at stake. Is our political system going to be dominated by the Koch brothers and other billionaires who spend unlimited sums of money? The answer is no. All right. But the only way we turn that around is at the grassroots level. The only way we do that is when people stand up and fight back. And tonight, I am here to implore you, please do just that. Thank you all very much.